Right. Welcome everyone to the 22nd edition of the Data Value Show. Today's show is going to be the value of a data architect, and again we've been chatting backstage again. We were a bit late to it, so without further ado, I'm going to bring Jai Parmar from the green room back to the main room. Hey Jai.
Hey, hi there. All right, Chris. Hi everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I normally start with like where I know people from. So I think really Sainsbury's. I think back we worked together. I think maybe many years ago. But Jay's a regular at our data meetups and on the data scene. So he's been on many panels and shows with us in the past. So it's great to have you here today. Do you want to give the audience a bit of a background about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I've been in the data space for about 20 years or so, almost 2 decades. And in that time, I've worked on multiple different types of platforms. So we've got things like predictive analytics platforms, big data platforms, customer data platforms, and obviously the modern data stack is what we call the new modern data architecture and modern data platform itself. So I've pretty much gone across the estate. And the interesting thing is in my time, not only have I worked in the technology space, but also in the people and process side as well, which if you look at, generally speaking, from an architect's perspective, that's where you want to be to understand exactly how things are going to put together for you to have a successful delivery. So in a nutshell, that's me. I'm based in London, and I'm currently working at a company called Snowflake.
Oh, I think we may be aware of that company called Snowflake. Great intro, and as I say, it's great to have you on the show. And this topic seems to be resonated quite well with some people out there, and I think it's a topic that's very close to both of our hearts because I think we've both, not that long ago, recently, we've always had that architect title or consider ourselves. I think I would call myself a recovering data architect because the data engineers took over, and you know I moved on for a little bit doing other things, but yeah, so I'm back now firmly in that architecture seat nowadays, enjoying it. So I think the first we had a few topics that were on there. I think the first one we had was, what's the purpose and definition of the data architect role, and how would you answer that one?
So the best way to describe it is you're laying the foundation for designing something. That's probably the key way to look at it. A design itself is something that is pretty much on paper. This is how you put things together. Like if you look at a construction of a house, you have 2 different things, right? So you've got the architecture plans about what the building's going to look like, and then there's the structural plans and what the actual builders themselves are going to do. So if you look at it from a high level perspective, the architecture will design what the solution is going to be. Now, that's a very simplified approach to what I'm saying. Is that's not the only thing. It's not just a piece of paper with boxes and lines and so on. I know that's what people talk about all the time to say that's what architects do. It's not entirely true in that scenario. But generally speaking, the purpose of the architect itself is to do one thing, right? Is to drive business value, right? Based on what you're trying to build in this scenario. Mm-hmm. And there's a number of tools, capabilities that you have in the architect's pocket to be able to deliver those values based on what the requirements actually are. So at the simplest level, that's the purpose of the architect, the end result.
I suppose if I wanted to build myself a nice little shed in the garden, I know what it must look like, but I know my DIY skills, what I had in my mind wouldn't have been what actually got delivered. Well, maybe it's because I'm not a very good builder as well as an architect. But I suppose if someone had given me the frames out there, I'm pretty sure I could just nail the panels to it. So yeah, I think it's getting a benefit from someone that's knows you've got the like a structural surveyor or something, and making sure that this is going to support how many stories you want to build on it, and it's gonna what's the weather conditions here? It's going to be able to deal with these requirements, or tornado proof, or termite proof, or whatever the specific requirements are that will be custom to that item you're building in this case.
But that's exactly it. And the term I normally use is going through the trenches, You've gone through the trenches, you've battle tested. You know what things are going to work, for which scenario things are going to work on. So back to your back shed, right? It may look really pretty at the beginning, but as soon as heavy rain comes, back to your example, then you might not have the guttering done correctly. You might have water dripping through the thing. So pretty much what we want to do is we want to build something that's long lasting, and it tailors it not just for the short term, not for the medium term, but also for the long term as well.
Yeah, and I suppose using that analogy and taking it into our data world is there's too many data sheds that have been built out there that weren't fit for purpose, and now people are trying to use it for not what it was originally set out for. So,
correct.
You need not only a data warehouse, you need a modern. I like using the coin the term a business value machine, but it is what is the modern data stack 2.3, 3.0, whatever version or iteration we are. You get to it. So, exactly. And I think the where this role, this data engineer, and this is where I think that architect role or that clear understanding of what a data architect performed was diluted, because good friend Joe Reese and Matt Housey, they took on the challenge of breaking down what data engineering was.
That's correct.
And from back when I was a lad, I was an ETL developer, or I was a database developer, or a visualization or a metadata repository developer, or whatever part of the puzzle, and there were, and that was had different titles because it was probably more pigeonholed in a different area. But this data engineer role arrived predominantly in that big data bubble, because everything had to be engineered. It was taking all those DevOps sort of skills and taking across. It was a different breed of data professionals was born, and I think that those engineers, where the lines in the sand of who's architecting this stuff. And I think the other thing that changed was the lack of the enterprise architecture, which some could argue is a good or a bad thing. But there was a void, and that void was too big, I think, for too long. So, and the data engineering, going back to the point of what sits in it, and I think there is an overlap, and it probably goes on to some of the other questions that we have, and it will just naturally go on to it. But do we believe, and using our building analogy earlier, do we believe that every builder could make a good architect? And using that analogy, and I'm not too sure if some of the builders I've had work on some of my previous projects, I don't think they would make good architects. But
so I think, to your point, I think some builders might become great architects in that scenario, but it all depends on the experience that you've got and what type of experiences that you have. Because the one thing, like if you look at it from, say, for example, one aspect from cost perspectives, if one of the architect's job is making sure it's cost efficient as well, and that's also one of the things that engineering does as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. So if someone's back to the analogy about building houses, right? If you ask an engineer, the engineer is going to know roughly, okay, fine, like we're going to need X, Y, and Z beams, we're going to need this walls, you have a rough cost element to it. But that's looking at only for just that component, right? So therefore, if you're just architecting that very small component, maybe more of a technical architecture, so going down a level compared to like a solution architecture versus a technical architecture, then they'll do a good job from a senior perspective. Someone in the junior space, however, they're just learning the ropes. They don't really know. They don't know how to do things properly. So I think one thing you always know, there's a concept, and I'm not going to say it. Well, maybe I will say it out loud. Cowboy builders, as they call it. Right. So, but the thing is, what ends up happening is that you get something on, you think it works fine, but then you realize later on that you didn't have the bells and whistles to make it successful medium term to long term, because it's very short term thinking, and there's a lot of rework happening. So the engineers that actually can do really well, right, as an engineer slash architecture type of mindset, are the ones that are able to think medium to short term. And those individuals are not actually the engineers themselves that are doing the work, and at that level, they're usually the team leads that go ahead, that
Yeah.
both have their experience, they're
Yep.
validating people's work, they're making sure they're doing it right. And I think those are the ones that really do stand out in terms of the crossover between engineering and architecture.
I think that's a good. I mean, I just was right. Experience was that word, and I think if you try and rush it, and that point of the engineer becoming an architect, and I do feel in this world there's a route of I need to get the next title, I need to get this title, and they're rushing just to go and get maybe land a job with an architecture title, probably before that they'd be really ready to be have the right experience to be an architect. I think it's having that right exposure of many projects that have provided some good reference cases. You see what's worked well, but also the point you made, battle scars earlier, what hasn't worked well.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you don't get that unless you've got the experience.
Yes.
And again, just staying in one place, or staying in one place, but not having experience in multiple. You can stay in one place, but still get experience to multiple environments. Making sure that you're keeping up with the definition of good. What is the art of the possible out there? I think that's what the architect brings to the table, and and they still can dip down if you need to in some of those areas, but it's probably not the best use of their time for it in some areas, I think.
So it's an interesting thing about time, because for small organizations, less so, but the enterprise architect really does play some of the critical roles in terms of how you want to do things. Because the one thing that I've always seen, the engineers are always one of those individuals that want to get their hands dirty really quickly, start playing with new toys, right? And that's great, right? So to get them on board, they start figuring out what's working, what's not working. And there's a bunch of tools out there that every engineer wants to use, and they want to try any reason to use it, which is right. So that's the key. But realistically, if you look at it from the architect's role perspective, we're not working from a technology level. We work at the capability level.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're trying to build capabilities within the organizations themselves and say, like, this is the different types of capabilities. We have the streaming capability, batch capabilities, and so on. And then, okay, fine. So what tools would work for these scenarios? Now, the interesting thing is certain capabilities and technologies are actually defined at the enterprise level, because they manage a lot of the licensing about what's going to be in, what's going to be out, and so on. So you get to a point, actually, is that the enterprise architects liaise with the solution architects to figure out how the designs are going to work. And then the data engineering component will sit on the side and say, like, initially at least, to say, okay, fine. What we want to do is making sure we build something based on what we currently have today and what's been allowed. And it's a really good thing, because a lot of the things I've worked on previously is things like tech radars. It's something that's it's a really interesting area, whereby within the organization you take a look at the entire landscape that you have today.
Yep.
Right. You look at the technology you have today, and you say, all right, these are the technologies that we think are end of life, and we're not going to have any more projects use them. Right. And that's, you say, like, that's it. We're not going to take we're not going to support it. That's what it is today. Leave it as that. Then you say, okay, these are the new types of technologies which we're looking to dip our toes into. So let's start trialing those. And then you get the technology we think they're consistent, they work, they do really well for us, and we're going to keep using them for the foreseeable future. And those things really relate pretty well when you start looking at the end result of what you're trying to deliver. Because if you go back to what I was saying before, in terms of medium to long term, if you're using a technology which is now classified as end of life within the organization, and an engineer builds it back on that, then you're automatically giving yourself extra work to be able to migrate that across automatically. So that's where, when you look at the value it provides, that's one of the different values that it does enable you to do.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And you just call it sunsetting, or when you're going to sunset certain capabilities, and yeah, I've seen that many times, and they're really good because you get the rocks. You know what's staying and what's going, and you can actually map that. Okay, so what coverage do they provide?
Correct.
And
exactly.
I think the other way of encouraging that sunsetting is, when new features you want to add out other capabilities, you only put it on some of the other frameworks or technologies that you want to have on your roadmap, and encourage people to come across, because if you use that, by the way, you get our deployments go weekly. You don't have to wait monthly, or it has this dashboard on it, or whatever glitter you can throw on it to incentivize them to go the right path that you want to go. I think that's a key skill that's needed from that architect, is that, I call it the Sherpa. You're taking along that path, right? You know where you're heading. They don't know exactly, and you're going to take the most natural path. But if they've gone, they'll just be going straight up that hill and probably falling off the jagged cliff that they didn't realise there was the path didn't take them the correct way. And they'll learn by that. Unfortunately, they wouldn't survive it, but they would have learned by that mistake. And I suppose that that architect role is to take them on that path. And I think the other thing is for that architect, it's to show that vision, and I think it's the communication aspect. So right. to be able to I've given examples of how you can encourage people to go that way, but you can't just go an enterprise architect. I've seen it before. We go, right, we're all moving to this technology here, and it's just never going to work. But the other end of the spectrum, and I started thinking about a post I did with a Jenga of a modern data stack. Why is it so wobbly now? And it's it's a Jenga. You're taking different pieces out. Having that ability to say, look, in order to support all those things, that you want to get that top, the whole stack to still be standing. Yeah. You cannot take out these pillars, or you cannot take out these pieces. Or you can slot these bits in the middle, but only if you don't slot that one out, because otherwise you will end up with that Jenga stack. Yeah. And I think the other, I've quoted, obviously, so I'm going to try and make sure it happens, that 2024 will be the year of the force multiplier, as a statement. But if you think of that force multiplier being, using that Jenga analogy, the top part of your building, it's not valuable. It's not there until you actually got all the other pieces.
Correct.
When building that stack to go and get to be able to sell the 50th floor penthouse flat for 50 million, you got to have another 49 floors. So you need to make sure that they are going to be able to support you selling that dream LLM AI generated, you're going to solve the world solution. It's never going to do it unless you've got all the right things underneath it. We have to do some shout outs, because we've had there's shout out to Kent Graziano. Let's put his comment on here anyway. It's a good point. Conceptual design and architects are very different than implementation engineering. So it's very not very common. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And another great comment from Daniel here as well. It's that responsibility element. And it's the same with the building or the regulators. We can say that this will support 10,000 people in there. And if it all falls down, and someone's accountable. I think there's accountability.
It actually comes back to trust, right? And realistically, is who the trust is with. And I think what Daniel just said, right, is the responsibility architect too. And I think the stamp on it, the approval stamp, to say, yeah, this is going to be trustworthiness, because if you look at the business value piece to it, right, and what we're trying to deliver, will it deliver the value which we suggest based on the XYZ business type of capabilities or components we're building? And if we turn around and we spent all this time and effort building something and it just didn't deliver business value, who takes responsibility of that? And it's correct. It says maybe actually it's my fault as an architect because I didn't deliver that, because I lead the engineering team in the right way.
Yeah, no, that accountability piece is, and I think I go back to that trust. It's trust, accountability, and evidenceable. And I think if you're adding all of those things in there, and fair play business, we've let you down a few times as data. We told you Hadoop was going to solve the world, and that didn't happen. Then we told you the modern data stack was modern, and we're telling you it's not. And there's only so much they can take, that they lose that trust in or believe what you're trying to sell, and this is where it becomes very hard to get decisions made in organizations. I think I did a joke the other day where the CEOs on the I think I did a poll about should CDOs start thinking, or CEOs have that CDO mentality.
Yeah.
And then the CEO that wouldn't have had come that route and doesn't have a good understanding or bad experience of data projects in the past, he's at the board meeting and say, right, okay, I want to move my product into this new country. You'll go to a CFO. Can you go intercompany transfers, use ledger setup for multi-currency, yada yada. Tick. Okay, brilliant. I know. Legal team, okay, right. Can you have the contracts in these languages and in these jurisdictions? So just let me check, but we're pretty sure we can cover those. And I go to the CDO and go, yeah, and I can do that, but also I reckon I can do a 10% operational cost saving with changing this technology to this new one here as part of that process. And the CEO goes, oh, I don't know about that. How much is it going to cost? Well, no, we've worked it out. It's going to be 10% saving. With it. Can I have a detailed plan, please? And some pros and cons of it. And CDO will move to another company where he has. But that's the problem is if you haven't got that evidence, and maybe the CDO should have come along with a whole another PowerPoint, but we shouldn't really need to. And I think this is called the data value show, and I do bang on about business value a lot.
Yeah.
But we should get to a point where it's inferred. When anyone knows what the data department does, they're not going to say, "Oh, they just run reports for me and write me extracts." They're going to know, okay, right, I know those guys. They've designed and delivered, these features for my department that have saved loads of money. You're going to get that, but you're not going to get that without an architecture sort of mindset in your organization, because everyone will be just trying to use all the latest tools and play around with all the cool stuff.
Yeah, but
which is fine.
But there is a component, though. We do need to trial these out to make sure what it does. I mean, how well it performs. Yes. Does it enable you to have better processes? Does it enable, like data catalogs, for example, and about how to manage your PII data and so on? If everyone had to manually go in and take a look at all your individual data sets and say, oh, this looks like PII and so on, right? But if you've got a technology out there which does that for you from a data governance perspective, right? That could be part of a data catalog, it could be anything, right? Then it can automatically do a lot of things. Now, what additional value would that provide in terms of your organization from a people and process perspective? That could help tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So, and this is the things that really come to play, because you don't have to refactor, but you do need to enhance, and you need to keep those things which you're trialing out to say, actually, what additional benefit would this be? Because if we said, oh, we would be having a 10% improvement, right? They say, well, in data world, that's not really that much, right? That's what someone will say. But if you're bringing down your end-to-end latency by 10%, and something was taking 1 hour, and now we're bringing it down by 10%, that's going to provide you a little bit more benefit depending on what your use cases are. And if we apply the same thing to the Formula One world, 10% is massive.
Yeah.
It just all depends on your end user and what their requirements are for the platform itself.
Yeah, and you're right. I think it's all about how it's described as well, because 10% can mean you need actually back to that talking the CEO language. He should be saying not 10%. It's a £4,200,000 saving over 12 months, and it's speaking the right language.
Correct. Exactly.
And to your point about the trialing new stuff, I think having hackathons, having controlled projects that can do an R&D is vital, and also it's vital for the team to keep that knowledge coming of what can be done, the art of the possible in the future when it's been validated, and give your company that competitive advantage. So we need architects really for all these things. This is what we're saying, but we would say that because we're biased, aren't we?
Do you know what? It's really interesting you say this, because I think obviously we need architects, but we also need engineering. Together, they work hand in hand to deliver business value, right? However, some organizations are really large, right? And they may have tens or hundreds of engineering teams, right? Then how does it work? We're trying to make sure those engineering teams are doing something similar, the same, different. And how do you align them together, right? And like the things like the data mesh world has now created more and more of these like engineering teams to work more independently. But the whole concept of like, for example, we've got these things like data governance and federated aspect of like the accountability and so on, right? Yes, you might be accountable for one little bit, but if you're working all differently, then how quickly are you driving value?
Yep.
Right. Overall, you in your box, you've done a great job in your own little box, but one box itself is not going to enable you to do the things that the business is really concerned a bit about. Exactly.
Yeah, it's having that bigger picture. Something I refer to it as the if you're a cog in a gearbox, everyone has a purpose or a role in that gearbox. But if you don't know what the other cog's doing over there, and someone's always looking, is that big cog, big cog, and not the little cog, cog. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we'll wait it out later.
But you're right, and I think, do you know what? It's really interesting because obviously what you want to do is when you want to drive these little cogs, right, making sure they work, you want to sort of reduce that time to value in terms of getting that end result and what you can parallelize. So like things as an architect like myself, when I'm building the end-to-end design, and I think terminology here needs to be sort of laid out, is in the data space, when someone said data architect, some people just think we're just data modelers, right? Which is a bit weird. I was like, no, that's not what we do. And I think what we do more than that, and we do, but there is a specific section for data modelers, and I think they do a great job in what they do. But as a solutions architect in data, right, our breadth is a lot wider than that. Right, we cover a lot of things, and one of the things we do cover, yes, is data modeling, right? But things like naming standards. How do we measure like things like what PII fields are going to be? How do we implement like encryption,
automation?
The whole point. So, like for example, how do you do A, B, and C? What type of capabilities are we delivering? How do we then use what we've done already? How do we add it into our asset catalog that we have that other people can start using? How do we make it into a little product within the organization, which are building blocks, is what we call them. And these building blocks can work one on top of another. And back to Chris, your point regarding the Jenga thing, right? If they've built the correct building blocks all the way up, right? What you see right at the top is your business users having trust right at the top looking down. And if it's swaying side to side, what kind of trust are they going to have on what they're being said? Especially if it's inconsistent and it's not very flexible. It's and pretty much the best way to describe it, if it falls down in front of them, will they trust you again to rebuild it again?
No, exactly. And we've had that because the Hadoop platforms, that's the issue we had. So I've done a couple of shouts to Paul Sargent. Shout out there. I think he just said, what hasn't worked well? Yeah, it's the most valuable. And I think I did a post the other day. I think Paul forwarded that one on or reposted it, which was about the biggest thing is about the unknown unknowns. But people say no, the known unknowns. The unknown unknowns are actually worse than the known unknowns, because at least you know what you don't know. But if you don't even know what you don't know, then that's even worse. So, but able to fill those gaps, what hasn't worked as well is don't always focus on the positives. Focus on the things that have been negative as well. We've got a question with David Hill here as well.
Just one on that point actually beforehand. It's really interesting you say the unknown unknowns, and it's really true. It's such a good statement. And usually what I normally do is there's a bunch of assumptions I'm making, which some of them I can't validate. Right. Sometimes you're like, I don't know who's going to give me this information. You go out there, you go into the business and say, okay, what about these things? And people just don't have the answers to them. And so whenever you put, like, from an architecture perspective, there's certain assumptions you have to make, but the best thing for you to do is document them as part of the design process. And as you go through the process and say, actually, these assumptions were wrong, we need to reevaluate again. And once you know that that assumption is now a risk, right? We need someone to be able to say, okay, who owns that risk? Who's going to be managing that? Then you can talk to address what the concerns are. Then we've got things like tech debt that we're obviously building behind the scene. Obviously, you don't want tech debt, right? It's one of those things they say you want to do it properly, but sometimes it's not possible because you find things out quite late. So later on, you want to say, okay, fine, we'll address that. And this will be the new plan or the new architecture or the new pattern we have. And when someone else wants to use it, use the new one and not the old one. So therefore, only the existing stuff gets rectified or the new stuff stays stable. So I agree with that.
Yeah, and I've gone on the tech debt one. You're going to get me on. Yeah, and it slows things. And I think there's something that's I think we're teasing out lots of other aspects that the architects perform, and
Yes.
and the engineers listening. These are probably things you haven't had to deal with, and these are the things that are on the fringe that have to happen to go and get the agreement for the budget to go and build that pipeline, or go and get the agreement to go and migrate from one area to another. And it's the it's those things that are happening around that architects are performing behind the scenes to look at the alternatives, or what other products that can be used for this, and bringing their experience of what has worked and what hasn't worked well in the past. But so we've got some of the questions I'm going to bring up as well, because they're coming in. So we've got one from David Hill here, and I think we've sort of touched on that as well, is that which we're just orchestration of the tech, the people, and the data. It's not just about the people. So I think I would agree that the enterprise data architect role, and you need to have a company big enough to have the need for an enterprise data architect role. You can have the aspects that have been formed by a smaller company. A lot of these things are easier to coordinate. There's less moving parts. But definitely defining short, medium, and long term. And I think that's a key activity of a data architect or an enterprise data architect.
I think from an enterprise data architect perspective, they're obviously concerned about the business model, how everything works, how the organization works, how technology pieces work, how you guys put together. But realistically, what ends up happening is that from a solutions architect perspective, the people and process side all comes into play, from how you do certain things. And the really interesting thing is it comes back to compliance activities that you have with things like GDPR, right to be forgotten, and so on. They don't really include those as part of the general enterprise piece. They have a capability for it and say, you might have an MDM solution that tells you something about the person. But when you start looking at a really true enterprise data stack, you need a people, process, and tech all to come together, depending on where your data sits at the end of the day. And you really want to consolidate that so it's easy to manage, and you know exactly what's happening with someone's data points. So in this case, if you're looking at it from, I would say the solutions architect, I would say, is more involved. At least that's what I found in my role, right? Is I cover a bit of the enterprise and mainly the solution architecture piece, but I cover all the people, process, and tech to get things moving. You might need some enterprise data architects for certain aspects of it, and especially for like looking at technology components, long-term vision about what they're looking at. Because obviously for really large organizations across multiple lines of business, you probably will have to speak to them if you want to try to consolidate large organizations. But for a smaller organization, probably less so. And to be fair to your point, Chris, like an enterprise data architect probably won't exist on small to medium companies.
I think something that is key, and I think when you do have the enterprise data architect, is normally companies that have acquisitions that happen. There's other companies that get bought, and it's how you actually absorb all these companies and to make them one. They're the ones that definitely need someone that has that. And each of those individual architects already come from other companies or other parts of the organization, and they're already very busy as well. So, but in any whatever level data architects, I think there is a responsibility to help with that short-term planning, medium-term planning, long-term planning, and then to orchestrate with whichever method you have possible. Hope with the carrot, not the stick, but the people that take them on that journey. And how you do that is you build their trust, and you deliver what they expect you to do, and then don't over promise and under deliver. Make sure you over deliver and under promise, if possible.
Best case, correct?
Yeah, the best case. So we got some of those. So we got Amit. Amit, we used to work before. Yep. Shout out to Amit. Yeah, make sure the elements fit the design. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Actually, it's actually quite interesting. There's the word member of squad. So it's actually quite an interesting thing because the certain squads and different teams are very differently organized as well, right? Because in one of the previous organizations I worked in, a squad was made up of like an engineering lead, a bunch of engineers, a business analyst, a data modeler, and parts of like secondary teams, which is like infosec teams and so on. And it's really interesting because you have to have input from most of those different people at some point, especially from a comms perspective, because if you just work with just data engineers only, your other stakeholders are going to be business on the other end of the on the end of the spectrum, to say these are your business stakeholders. But if you have a BA within your team, right, that allows you a bit more context about what's been going on, speaking with the business stakeholders, speaking with yourselves, understanding what's happening. And then you can work with the data modelers as well, because you're not only are you building data models themselves, right, at generally the high level, but generally you're trying to figure out how it works to drive business value. So you might have some raw data on the left, right, which are coming in. You might need to figure out what's going on. You might have some infosec teams that need to figure out, okay, how is this transmission happening, right? Is it secured across the organization? And so all these teams come into play. So with the definition of each member of the squad is going to be different for every organization, but there's different individuals within them that play a pivotal role in the grand scheme of things. And it's trying to figure out who those people are, understanding when you communicate with them, when you need approvals from them, because approvals are going to need at some point, especially from infosec, about when that's going to be, what they are looking for to address those, and ultimately finally get to the point whereby you can say, yeah, this is fit for purpose for production deployment. So I think that's a really good statement to make.
Yeah, and I think on that squad term as well, it's scaling. So if you have multiple squads all working in the same area, that role of the architect is to make sure they're all working in the same way. So with different components of a design maybe that you've got, and it's all going to work collectively together. I think I was working on the same project with Amit a few years ago, which was one of the key components of that role really. I've got a question from Sana, but I think I'm so far behind. It was about 12 minutes ago, this one. We may have already covered it, really. It has the answer to the category, why do you need one? And hopefully we've articulated that a bit. But I think I'm just going to go back to one point earlier on, which can link to this. I've talked a lot about competitive advantage recently, and I think we can use your company you're working at the moment as an example for that. Is companies that release new features weekly, and maybe new other benefits, very very regularly. You're going to have that competitive advantage because your technology is ahead of everyone else, and that's how they've done very well. Take that to any other industry out there. Why is one insurance company not as good as another one? Why is one e-commerce company able to? They have whatever it is. They have competitive advantage. What that is to every different industry is very different. I think what the key thing to achieving competitive advantage is to have the trust that you can change things regularly, that you're not going to break things. Because if you didn't do that, you would have the opposite effect. So that is probably one of the key things that stops innovation, is the risk factor of making changes. I think if something's very well architected, you've already built in that risk mitigation, you will be able to make sure you have competitive advantage. So how I'd answer that one, because you won't have competitive advantage, you won't have a business unless you have a data architect. But that's maybe a bit of a bold statement to say.
Yeah, I think that one of the statements from Val that's been put together is actually quite interesting, because it's true. Because to your point, it's like the Titanic. As long as Captain that's telling the ship, let's go in this direction. Doesn't matter if it's dark, light, whatever. We're sailing a course. We have to. If we need to reroute, we know what's coming up ahead of us. We have future vision about and what the problems are going to be. We're going to try and mitigate those from an architecture perspective and as an architect perspective. And then hopefully we won't hit any icebergs. And even if we do, right, we won't sink.
It wouldn't sink. Yeah.
Okay.
And then if we did sink, we'll have a submarine down there that wouldn't explode.
Yeah, so that without sinking, and to be fair, it's never do you know what, especially when you first start off, right, it's never an easy ride. It takes a lot of effort together to bring everything to fruition, because you do get stuck, especially when you don't have the patterns in play, you don't have the right naming conventions, you don't have all the scenarios, right? You need to start building this and start building. So initially, when you first start off, and this is the very difference between the way that the architects would run it and the way that engineering will run it.
Yeah.
Engineers want to deliver things quickly, right? And they just want to get stuff done, which is fine. However, what you want to do is you want to lay the right foundations. That's where the architects come in ahead and say, right, let's do this properly. Let's think about the future vision, how we will do this. What patterns are we going to produce? What makes more sense? Have a collaborative type of approach in terms of engineering and architecture, and say, actually, now we've got these capabilities. Like, say, for example, you've got one thing that's coming straight in, and say, all right, this is one capability. These are the technology we're using. This is how we're doing it. And we document that this is for this pattern and for this type of technology doing this particular thing, right? This is how we've done it. Now, as soon as you've got a similar capability come up with slightly different pattern, is it still fit for purpose? Right? Because someone just looks at it and says, oh yeah, it's the same thing.
But did they go and read the spec that wasn't written, which said it supports these use cases, but by the way, it doesn't take into account different regulatory requirements or else? Oh, it doesn't. Okay, I know to extend that. I won't go and use it and go and get some breach. Yeah, exactly. And it's a good one from John here as well. One needs to find the balance between monolith data architecture and business agility. Yeah, that's an interesting one, because we talked about modern data stack becoming very complicated. We want consolidation. When does consolidation become monolith? I think that you need to make sure that you don't have to be too sticky to one thing, or happy that you are sticky enough to it that you can mix and match other pieces.
I think, but I do think though, like, the business agility piece is actually quite an important thing. I think that's where your value really comes into place. And we found this during COVID, right? We found this really, a lot of businesses had to pivot very quickly into a completely different way of working.
Making PPE stuff,
Exactly. That's one way of looking at it. But some organizations had to completely change their supply chain, how they're currently working. Before, there was loads of people working in one specific area. That had to completely change. They had to hire more people. So if you look at it from the business agility perspective, what are you trying to achieve, right? And we found, or at least I found this, right, is that a lot of organizations pivoted to optimization, right? In figuring out what's working, what's not working, look at cost analysis. And off the back of it, they also started to do a couple of things and leveraging more AI and ML to help predict certain things moving forward, to help with the supply chain, look at products and so on. So there was a lot of good things that happened off the back of it. But sometimes you need something to stir the boat for people to move on from an existing process, which might actually be legacy and monolithic today.
And I think you process was the word. I was just about business processes, and it was very easy, I suppose, to move from, during that COVID period, using that as an example, when everyone working remote. If people didn't actually understand the business processes, what was going on, it was very hard to immediately go and take your business to a remote capability. But there's a few things that highlight there. The business process, or ones that did have good business processes to find, and maybe collected all the associated data from those business processes, they're then able to think, okay, where can I optimize on those business processes, because they've got the data to work out, where to perform that activity. So so again, I think that's more of an architecture sort of mindset of knowing to go and get there than an engineering mindset. The engineers, the experience you've got as an engineer, go, I may know where those logs all exist for that. I might know how technically to go and put some APIs into an API gateway to go and get there, but they probably wouldn't have gone and generated the business case or justification to go and get that project for it. Correct. And all the boring stuff that as architects have to do, go on whiteboards, draw these pretty pictures. Ian Blunden, he's done a V shout out there. One of the things he said, we're like a bunch of butterflies all sitting around a whiteboard. But we are trying to get to the best design. That's what we do around a whiteboard.
It is. Well, I think for that is the best design for that point in time for those assumptions. Right?
Yes.
Because there's never going to be the best design forever. It just doesn't work organically. We always have to like start reevaluating and look at what's good and so on.
Exactly. So that's why. Otherwise, every modern data stack that would be built now would just be Fivetran, Airflow, and Power BI. And then that's because I've seen it on a picture somewhere. So that's just and it probably what it was. The right choice. And Snowflake in the middle, obviously. That was the right choice at the right time. But it's based on whatever requirements they had. And I think that one person requirement and that blueprint isn't going to be maybe fit for purpose for the requirements you've got. But
it's actually interesting you just said that for the use case and the business side, because sometimes things change very rapidly within organizations as well, especially when there's new arrivals and the departures that have within the organizations, and everything seems to pivot. And it's really interesting because different senior stakeholders, right, will have a different way of thinking about what they want to do, how they want to do it, what their values are. And in the enterprise space, we call it a viewpoint, right, which is about what that person's concerns are about what's going on. Now, what you have today, right, might be fine for the current stakeholders you have within organizations. But if there's a senior leadership business change, that could change in an instant, right, depending on what the new types of things they wish to bring in. And that does cause a lot of, I wouldn't say chaos, but initially it's a bit more interesting because we have to look at different technologies. Maybe they might want to bring another technology into the mix as well. But it's about then stabilizing what's already there and then potentially transitioning something across, or justifying what you currently have today is actually providing the business value at the right cost at the right time. And I think, but if you go back to that point, and when there's a massive business change, then architects will, that someone tells around and says, why is it costing us X, Y, and Z? Or why have we done this? From an architect's perspective, we can justify and say, this is the reason why, this is what it enables, this is the business value it's got. And if we had to swap it out for X, Y, or Z, this is the additional cost it would do, which wouldn't make sense for these scenarios and these reasons. And I think that really does drive better understanding across all different levels of the organization. So
there's I totally agree, and I'm just watching the chat's hot at the moment. There's a lot going on in there, and it's a question question from Ian that looks like between the two of them they're answering it between themselves. So, so we may not need to answer, but I think it's a very very good point from Ian about how can LMs make a data architect's job more productive. So yeah, I mean, it's all about automation. I think is automating everyday activities you perform. I watched there was a podcast I saw the other day. A lady called Sol. So she's obviously talking about business value. I think like she's on Joe's show, and she listed like things and any architect out there or in that role, you know what you do. Hopefully, you know what you do during your working day from the data in, but there can be certain things you do there. We have to do a lot of presentations. We have to bring out lots of PowerPoint, and maybe sometimes making them all nice and pretty to go and get them. It's not the best thing for us. We may want to go and get some code snippets to give an example of that, and we're lazy and we don't want to go. We don't want to go do these things. But it's just for the purpose of a demonstration to prove a point. Why go and reinvent the wheel and do it all yourself? So, I think those things can definitely make people more productive from an operational perspective. I suppose the other spin is what other activities we perform just what things would we no longer need to do because it's been done, and nothing, because obviously we do everything that they couldn't. This would be answer for that one.
So it's interesting. So this is an interesting topic, right? Because if you look at the two different facets that we're talking about today, we've got data architecture and data engineering, right? From the data engineering point of view, I think the Gen AI ecosystem is shown that it's invaluable to help developers build quicker, faster. You know, the fact that it doesn't always produce the right results, and that's why you need the specialist to be able to go in and just double check, just make sure it's doing what it's doing, and that allows you to drive value quicker. But the one thing I've seen recently, which is actually pretty cool, and it does also help the engineering and, well, not engineering, but front end development processes as well, is the whole concept of multimodal type of large language models, which is where you can pretty much have a box. You can draw boxes on screen, and you can have your design like as an image and say, this is what we're looking for. And you can actually get Gen AI systems, models themselves, to actually produce you what that could look like based on different patterns that you have. So one of them could be the fact that if you've got a front-end developer and you want your website to look like this and you want some boxes, there's models out there now that actually give you that, builds you the front end for that, which is actually pretty impressive. I see the fact that when you're looking at it from a point of view from an architecture perspective, if you've got things like, for example, you've got text on a whiteboard, you've got your diagrams, you may have some business like terminology and languages. So these are the technologies, these are the capabilities. I see it moving to a place whereby actually saying, oh, based on all these things, based on these assumptions, this is one pattern that how you could be built based on X, Y, and Z. And I think that's where we're going. I don't think we're there yet from an architecture perspective. That's definitely not the case. But from an engineering point of view, we're getting much quicker in terms of producing those end results. So realistically, what I'm trying to say now is that architecture sort of is a bottleneck to try to get business value in this particular in that context, especially from a Gen AI space. But the thing is, Gen AI models at the moment, for most of the stuff that we're talking about today, it's all about structured data as well. So to your point, most of the models that we see today, what you're building is for those end use cases. So if someone turn around and says, actually, I want to build a model that answers these business questions, and looking at all the data set that you have, especially with RAG and so on, some of the fine tuning you might want to do, then yeah, I think the architects will do a lot of work to try and get them to that end result. The only thing I would suggest is that for anyone that's building those models, we want to reduce the amount of hallucinations that we have. And the only way to do that is to go back to business, understand how it works and where the stops are in your model. But obviously, the architect will give you those ideas as well about how that works, especially for someone that's got the background and these type of capabilities. Some architects won't have it. Don't get me wrong. Because I've worked in the predictive analytics platform in the past, so I understand how this stuff works, what's involved, and so on. But not every architect's going to have that. So you probably have to work with a data scientist or an ML engineering team to actually really get an understanding about what's happening.
So we'll do one more question. We'll do a recap, see if we actually covered the 5 points that we were. I think we have anyway, but we just don't naturally. But it's one thing. It's actually for you. So it's a question for Jay. Eva doesn't. Yeah, Eva I can ask me when I see him next to me. But
so what's the hardest thing you faced in your role? I think the hard. So
is it the meetup you went to? The data meetup you went to? Was that the one?
Sorry, no. I think I think the hardest part is working on an engineering team that doesn't value architecture. They think they know what's right, and it's a really difficult situation to be in, because it was one of my past experiences for one of the companies, and the engineering team was already there. They've literally been working quite independently themselves. They said they don't need anyone, and I was brought in as an architect to help stabilize from an architect perspective. Stabilize the architecture side of things to making sure that everyone's aligned across the entire estate. And it's not just me and the architect for one team. This is a team this is like a very much a distributed type of domain type of team. There's loads of different things happening. I was one of the architects, not just on one team, but a few teams. So I covered quite a few to try and standardize across multiple different teams. And the hardest part is to gain the trust of the data engineers on the scene, especially the tech lead, is to understand exactly what value I bring, because they think they know better than everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And it was quite a difficult process to actually go through. And it's not the easiest thing to do. And you do have a lot of arguments. You do have a ton of escalations, don't get me wrong. Right. And we had to escalate from an engineering team. We had to escalate from a architecture perspective in the past. Eventually got to a point whereby we just sat down and just said, look, tell me what it is about the work that I'm doing that's impeding you or you have a problem with. And we had a good chat between all of us, and we figured out we're all trying to do the same thing. We just got different views and mindsets to how it works. And ultimately, once we sat down and we communicated a lot better within the team and said this is the benefits and so on, what we found is that the collaborative approach worked really well, whereby, back to Chris's point regarding, we don't have everything to architecture only and we throw it over the fence. No, that's not how these work, because you do want to leverage the experience that the data engineering team are going to have, right? What they've gone through, the trenches they've come through. Because if you work, especially for teams which are very technically savvy and they know what they're doing, it's not just about architecture throw it to engineering, or engineering just do what they want to do. It's about bringing things collaborative, getting the trust on both sides, to then go one step further and say, yeah, this is a joint activity. Yes, you'll still have some disagreements on way things would work, but as long as you explain yourself and you understand it and say the reasons why, eventually there's only two things that happen. They go, okay, fine, fantastic, Jay, that's good. Or we escalate, but the escalation is not personal. It's just a decision point that needs to be made. And that's one thing to be realized. So that's the hardest thing that I've actually had to face ever.
I'm glad you didn't say that it was this show or.
So it's not in 2023. It was quite a few years ago, but it's one of those. It's one of those things that I really find that laid the foundation for me to be a better architect today.
Yeah,
I'll say that's definitely one of the hardest things I've ever had.
And if you have to justify and rationale the reason for you there, you're gonna be able to explain it much better going forward. So yeah, I think you learn from your battle scars and your experiences. If you haven't gone through it, you're not able to take on that challenge, so to speak. So I think just the last 4 minutes to summarize. So I think we've covered what the purpose and definition of a data architect role was. And I think should all data engineers have an architectural mindset? Well, I don't know if we cover that one quietly, but specifically. But I think, ideally, depending on the size of the company, you'd want to have that architectural mindset, because if someone's just happy doing, I think we said this before, if it's a doer just wants to get on with stuff, as long as the end thing gets done, they don't have to worry about, if they've been told how to do it, and they'll have to worry about whether that would scale because someone else has already dealt with that themselves, then no, they don't have to. But I think you need to make sure you have that architect. If you don't have an architect in your team, in your company, make sure you have someone with an architectural mindset, or a couple of them at least.
You do, yes, exactly. And some organizations, it's interesting because some organizations have architecture as a separate stream to engineering. And I've seen organizations actually encompass architecture as part of the engineering stream, right? But ultimately, the goal's the same, right?
Yep.
You want to deliver something that's long-term. Now, back to the point, engineers can have a long-term view, but initially they're not the ones that just start off at learning things, right? You're learning the technology, you learn how that's going to work, the nitty-gritty things. It's the long-term vision and planning about business value, business drivers, how you get the end goal. I mean, at the end of the day, something that's going to end up as a factor dimension. If you've got these business types of capabilities or metrics that need to be calculated, and you're missing a data point, who's responsible for that? Is it engineering? Is it architecture? And generally speaking, in most cases, because I used to do the design itself for both the source data requirements and the target, then it would have been my fault to say this doesn't exist. But obviously, you're working with data models themselves to build out the data models, and they will, with BAs, if you're working with BAs, will also tell you, how do you do this metric? How do we do that metric? So I think to that point, there's a lot. The mindset's there from an engineering perspective. You just have to have those battle scars, understanding long term, not short term, which really will enable you to be a better individual overall.
I think someone's referred to it as well. Is architecture is a capability you have in your organisation, and it doesn't have to be a role sometimes. And I think if you start thinking of that ways, then you've got the right coverage. It's not all about the job titles. So I think the next thing, do all data engineers make good data architects? I don't think that is always the case. They may do eventually, but don't rush the journey. I think we'll go. I guess what we didn't actually cover really, to be a data architect, do you have to be a data engineer first?
The answer is no, you don't actually, because you don't need to know the nitty-gritty of technology. You need to have the nitty-gritty about the capabilities, right? About how it works. And like, for example, coming back to originally, we're talking about building a house. Do you think most architects that build a house know exactly?
No, I agree.
Yeah, they won't know exactly what type of concrete, what type of flex that's required, and so on. And that's what so you don't expect everyone or an architect to know everything, but you do need to be able to have people that know these things. And great teams and great leaders, they on the shoulders of people that know their thing, and they always make sure that the people that work for them, right, are good in their space. So if they ever need a question or they need something answering, there's always people they can reach out to. And that's one of the parts of having a good capability within your organizations, with engineering and architecture, both working together to drive that value. And I think that's a really valuable
collaboration is key. We all want, and I think when you were talking about earlier about the org structure, it's where they report, if it's centralized, decentralized. I think organizations, they need to look at their CDO org structure, how it comes down from that, and then within it, make sure your whole team's set up for success. Because up until now, we haven't had where we're given the accountability, we haven't given the autonomy. And I think the two you need both to have that full accountability. Otherwise, there'll always be a bit of a blame game.
Yeah,
that happens. Right, we've gone over, and I just put the next. So next week we have got the 2024 Data Crystal Ball. It's a yearly event. It's the first one we've ever done. So I think I've done it last year. Did some predictions, but this year we got Ben coming on board to discuss the 2024 Data Crystal Balls. What's going to happen in the future? And yes, so I think on that note, Evo, we're going to have to come back to your last question. I've got to think about it as well. I've just seen it coming. But thanks everyone listening. Thanks again, Jay, for being on the show. Always a pleasure having these chats. I'm glad that we can take the chat to the public, even with my accidental Tourette's. Yes. Yes. Anyway, on that note, and I hope to see everyone next week. But it's on the Tuesday next week, not the Monday. And then that'll be the last show. We have 2 weeks off until we hit the new year. I think already got January into February already lined up, but I haven't got it all out there. But thanks for everyone, and thanks again, Jay. Oh, sorry, if anyone wants to contact Jay, where do they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'll post my LinkedIn profile on the session below.
All right, fantastic. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. Let's call it a wrap.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.